Now we're going to turn towards the export market and look at how is the U.S. kind of interacting with what's happening abroad. What is that? What do we expect going forward? So first is gasoline. Gasoline had a small decline of about 178,000 barrels a day, fairly in line with what our expectations were. The big surprise was more the distillate increase of about 258,000 barrels a day. We were expecting an increase, but not to the level that we saw. And it could be twofold. So one, you had guys that are saying, look, hurricane's coming, let's get this out, let's get it into the market. The other side is, what price discounts are we seeing? How are we trying to get some of this middle distillate into the market, or distillate in general, just because that is the bigger overhang. So when we look at a global level, obviously you want to look at light distillate and or gasoline, depending on how it's qualified. But we also want to understand the middle distillate cut, because that is the bigger component across the board. And when we look at the pressure coming on, so when we, in our OPEC show, we talked about two refiners coming off in one in Italy, one in Spain. That is actually happening on the 18th. So we're going to see more run cuts in Europe. Gunvor just mothballed a refiner, 200,000 barrels a day. That, again, just looking at the demand situation, when you look at oil demand as an aggregate, Europe continues to be the overhang, which the Gunvor one is new. We talk about the Italy and Spain, Spanish one in the OPEC show. But again, it's just because the products become the bigger issue. So when we look at some of the others, relatively stable across the board. LPG or propane had a big spike of about 219,000 barrels a day. Again, that will pare back, but it still will remain strong. It'll just pare back just because it's a timing delay. It's a timing problem. Calcasieu Pass still being down is going to be a headwind just in terms of getting product, out from behind that impasse and then getting new ships in. Crude exports, we were expecting a decline to about 2.3. We got to about 2.1, so we had a decline of about 524,000 barrels a day. That will reverse. We will get an increase closer to that 2.3, 2.5, just because, again, the timing delay of just getting ships in and out. The bigger issue is, as we talked about Europe, South Korea's biggest oil refiner, they won't be raising operating rates anytime soon. And when you think, so it's SK Innovations, so they operate in export-oriented processors in the Asian fuel hub. And the problem is that refining margins remain about $3 below break even. So again, you're seeing guys, refined by guys, I mean refiners, operating at bare minimums to just maintain volume, maintain pressure, so you don't have to shut down. Do shut down the full facility. You're just kind of picking where you're shutting down, what processes you're shutting down, and that's just the inherent problem. So the SK Energy has a complex in Ulsan, which is 840,000 barrels a day, with an affiliate of 270,000 barrels a day. Again, those are just going to be under pressure and maintain those run cuts. Just as as we'll go through, we're seeing run cuts, as we've been talking about, not only in South Korea and Europe, but also in China, which is going to be that headwind to this expectation of a resurgence of Chinese demand. So when we look at just what happened with the gasoline export numbers, we had the nice increase. We were talking about coming closer to that 5-year average, or I should say 9-year average. Again, it's going to remain. We don't think it's going to come down much further. It'll kind of hang within this level and maybe have a small increase now that some of this adjustments have been made and gasoline demand has picked up fairly well in Latin America. We've seen a nice little pop, especially in Colombia and Brazil. Brazil actually just cut pricing, so hopefully trying to see some of that additional flow through. The pressure is going to come is, where is Europe going to send some of their product? Because right now West Africa is fairly filled in terms of the amount of gasoline in the market. So that's going to put pressure as to where are we going to compete. So because instead of it going to West Africa, maybe it makes it a little diversion and ends up in the Latin American markets. The distillate fuel export. So even though we had a big decline, and now we had a big increase, and we're still holding around that 9-year average. So we just like to talk about how that we just think that we're going to hang around this 9-year without much deviation. So we think we will get a small decline, but again, not a huge meaningful one, like not coming back down to the levels we saw last week. It's just going to be more along where that dotted line is, just in terms of where the demand is going. Then as we look forward, so that's kind of what's going to happen this week into next week. As we go forward, it's the middle distillate that concerns us the most, as we see areas that are just flooded with product, which again is just becoming a problem. Like as I look right now, just to see what kind of data points we have in Europe, Europe remains elevated, and then as we go through Singapore, that remains elevated, and that's going to continue to be a problem, especially as we have new exports coming from China, where we actually see an increase in exports of not only gasoline but the key component of middle distillate. So then as we shift into, well, what's happening abroad? So we had a nice drop down. It was driven by both US, Japan, and Fujairah. So it was across the board. Fujairah had another nice step down. That's something where, again, coming full circle back to the WTO comments and where trade is, we think that that's going to start to normalize a bit as we see some of this product getting stuck in the Middle East. But we're also seeing a decline of local demand, which again is going to put more, not only product on the water, but also more oil on the water. Japan is just kind of normalizing based on where we are. Obviously, we're still well above 2019, 2018 levels, but the U.S. obviously had that big decline in distillate, which will start to normalize and get, we will start to see not another 7 million barrels of decline, but something closer to what is seasonally normal of anywhere from 1 to 2 million barrels, at least this week into next. And the reason why, and again, we go through this in detail in the OPEC show, so I won't go too deep here, but the Asian floating storage remains the overarching problem. We have crude oil in the water, which has come down slightly. We did have about 70 million barrels of a storage farm come online in China. That's taking some product off the water onshore, but it doesn't mean that we're seeing that big turnaround where it's getting into the refiner and going into the overall market, which it's just sitting in storage. And that's going to be the overarching theme of, well, is it real demand? Is it just moving it from the right hand to the left hand without actually changing the economics? And when you look at total crude oil in floating storage, we're actually starting to see it creep higher. Now, this is as of, this is as of 10/9. So, but as we look through the remainder of this week and into next week, the North Sea, Norway, and the Middle East continue to see shifts higher, while we see a little bit of a decline in West Africa. But again, it's just we're seeing more oil in transit, and we'll talk about that in a minute in terms of where we're seeing that oil in transit. And so just kind of talking about that West Africa. So West Africa, we're starting to see that little increase. The Middle East is the one that's concerning us a little bit. And then when we look at the North Sea, so the North Sea is actually seeing a floating storage actually triple. So we're seeing another step up with about 13 million barrels being put into storage, just because the North Sea is not seeing the demand. And coming back to the comments about the reductions in European refiners, the issue is you have Norway at 2012 levels in terms of production and loadings. You have the North Sea increasing. You have now Libya. So our expectation was for Libya to be at 390,000 barrels a day of production by 10/16. And where are they? But they're at 500,000 barrels. So that we were expecting that we were going to get closer to maybe 390,000 through October. They were already at 500. And that means that they can really get to 600 to 750,000 barrels. So 750,000 barrels we thought was a 6-month time frame. They could be there by the middle of next month. And again, there could be a problem with the tank, the pumps. There could be another resurgence of issues in terms of the ceasefire. But they need dollars. They need spending. They had that turn off. So again, that shifts into Europe. So we did have another bid up in euros. But when we look at just what is the aggregate going to look like in the Mediterranean and Europe in general, Libya is increasing flows, Norway's increasing flows, North Sea is fairly stable, and euros. So again, that comes full circle to where does the U.S. barrel go? Where does the incremental U.S. export go? It's already started to slow down into Asia, and we're not seeing that incremental buyer in Europe. So again, that's going to just put more in storage, keep pushing to filling, and just put more pressure in pad 3, where we think you're going to see more products sit there. So just looking at Shandong, so this is, again, a little dated. It hasn't updated yet in the system just because of Golden Week and the holidays, but we've actually seen this increase. Excuse me. So this is actually going to take out that high and get closer to where we were in January and February, just based on data points that, well, I'll talk about right now. So we actually, we keep talking about the levels, but high domestic inventories of gasoline and diesel and seasonal weakness. And that's where we keep trying to hone in on. Golden Week is typically a big surge, and we're just not seeing that surge. And it was down about 25 to 30% versus last year, which again just hits total demand, leaving additional product in the system. And right now, there's an expectation of about another 400,000 barrel a day cut out of the Chinese independents through November and December. Now, we've already seen a decline. So just to give you an idea of what has the decline been, China's independent refiners in Shandong, which are the teapots, they processed 1.99 million barrels a day of imported crude in September. That's the smallest number since March, which is down 4.4%. So when you think about where they were in March, which is this level right where we are as we're creeping higher, they're producing back to those levels. They're not getting new import quotas. So all of this crude that's coming in is getting stuck there. And the problem is they need to pay the piper because they've just been, crude fell below, Brent fell below 40, and they owe someone money. And the problem is they just don't have that capital. So and at the same time, you have China bringing on SOEs, or state-owned enterprises. And although China crude buying was expected to return in October, FGE, which is just the company watching things, hasn't seen any evidence of strong pickup, which may be due to the bullish near-term outlook on refinery runs, which again is what we've been saying for the last several weeks, where we just see refiner pressure coming in, and especially given not only just local demand, but what is the pressure kind of abroad, and just how are they going to get that spare capacity into the market. Here we're just looking at total Singapore oil products. Again, we're back to the all-time highs. There's really no pull through that we're seeing. India is a little bit of a bright spot. We did see some additional demand going into India, which again just kept it from going into Singapore. But this is even factoring that this is showing flow that's left and gone into Europe, and we still see these elevated levels. Now, this is looking at all of Singapore oil products. Now let's hone in and just look at middle distillates, which you can see is at a new seasonally adjusted all-time high. And the problem is the trend. The trend remains in a negative trajectory, where we continue to see builds across the board with more product just sitting in not only onshore but also offshore, which is going to just be a headwind for total refinery throughput and just total demand. This is just a recap of where things sit. You can see that we're on a Fujairah level. We're right kind of where they should be, or where we'll start to see some builds come back through. But again, there's an issue between not only inventory but also where's the demand, which will be that overarching headwind as we see these flows jockeying for position. And here's Japan looking at crude oil and distillate. You see the small drop, but again, we remain well over 2019, 2018. And they were a big buyer of spot cargoes, which was a big problem overall, because you saw some spot cargoes taking advantage of pricing, and now they've left the market. The other bigger problem, we talked about Libya, but is also Iraq. So Iraq is actually increasing production, which they give these numbers, and now they're actually well over those numbers in terms of what their guidance was and what they said they were going to do. And right here, we actually have, euros were bid a little bit higher, but Iraq's about 260,000 barrels above where they said they were going to be. So not only are they not meeting the OPEC trajectory, they're not meeting their own trajectory, which is just going to be a problem. And you can talk about, they're going to do the right thing. They have to do, the balance sheets are stressed. So you need dollars, you need FX reserves. You can't tell me Nigeria, who is asking for forgiveness and or extensions on interest payments, if they can't get price, they're going to try to get volume. And we're seeing that in Iraq, we're seeing that in Nigeria, and we're seeing that with how quickly Libya is coming back. Now, Libya is going to be a headache for OPEC because, let's be fair, they're excluded and they're allowed to get to 1.2 before the conversation even turns to them. So they even have some delta to play with, which means that that's going to increase the overall problem. And now that you had this meeting, and again, coming back to new demand issues coming into the market, as we look at jet, as we look at gasoline, and as it rounds out to distillate, that is going to be a headwind going forward. And it's going to be difficult to see how OPEC can increase production allotments by 2 million barrels a day starting in January. They're just going to have to adjust that, just because if they were to do that, you would see some of the draws that we've been seeing across the board, averaging anywhere from 5 to 20 million barrels a month coming out of storage. That would adjust instantly, and we'd start to see that start to increase, and that would be an overall problem if you think about pricing. So these are some of the headwinds. Again, we talk about this in the economy show, looking at the pressure that we expect on the global economy. And then we go through a bit more detail on the supply-demand fundamentals in the OPEC show. So thanks again for watching. On Friday, we can expect our favorite, the Primary Vision Frac Spread Count. I won't be here. You'll be joined by Matt Johnson. He's going to take you through what to expect and what those numbers are. And then starting next week, we had a great conversation with Tin Bimes, where we go through what's happening in the world. He's the head editor of the AOGR, or the American Oil and Gas Review. And then we have our normal lineup of the EIA on Wednesday, back because this was all things were thrown off because of Columbus Day. Then we have our economy show on Thursday, and then our favorite, the Primary Vision Frac Spread Count. So thanks again for watching. I'm Mark Rossano, founder and CEO of C6 Capital Holdings, coming to you from Primary Vision Network.